Hello and welcome to the question and answer time for this week's Convo. I am Ada Schmidt-Thiessen and I have been a faculty member at Bethel College for a long time until my retirement at the end of last school year. Thank you to Jennifer Chappell-Deckard and her committee for their work on planning this convocation for Social Work Month, which is March, and for selecting an excellent and interesting speaker in Jatem Taylor. So we are ready to get started. Jatem is, as you recall from our presentation earlier in the week, she is the executive director of the Front Porch Alliance and a social work graduate of Bethel College. Jatem, here's one of our first questions. Could you tell us more about the community work that you've done and how do you show up in that work and help others learn to rise up and become who they truly are?
Okay. So because I've only been with Front Porch for about 3 months, I'm going to just give y'all, there are 3 places that I had my employment with shortly after graduating from Bethel, starting with Mennonite Central Committee around the corner from the college. And what I was in charge of was program administration, so 5 programs within the 16-state area of Midwest. And how I've shown up is like I was working with Northern Cheyenne Nation around sovereignty issues. And in that way, showing up just looked like taking a back seat and listening and being able to hear what folks were doing. I worked with international folks with International Volunteer Program, as well as some issues down in New Orleans. It was shortly after Hurricane Katrina. And so working around like the prison industrial complex, some of the things that were happening after Katrina are some of the things that are still happening today, that new folks moved in, gentrified the area, and then like tried to push out those who had generations living in community. After I worked with Mennonite Central Committee, I moved back to Kansas City, and I work with Rosedale Development Association. That was my sweet spot because I totally got to work with the babies. And so out of school programming, so after school with financial literacy, as well as like activities. So we had like a walking school bus that we walked the kids to school every day. We worked with them like community cleanups, gardening, things of that nature. And so the ways you show up for youth, you have to actually just be authentic because youth will call you out. And so the ways that I showed up for them is like, again, still listening, still being your authentic self, still making sure you're community minded. And so one thing I learned from Rosedale is that all that we did, we took from the community. Surveys, making sure we had small groups, one-on-ones with folks, just to gather information to be able to say how we will get our footing moving forward in that neighborhood and doing work. Currently here, 3 months, and my plan is to do community surveys, like to listen to the people, because at the end of the day, the work that we do for them should be guided by them. They're the ones who are on the receiving end, and I want to make sure that their voices are heard.
So are you working in a different neighborhood than Rosedale?
I am. Rosedale is in Kansas City, Kansas, and the neighborhood I am working in now is East Kansas City, Missouri. And so different demographic of folks, different socioeconomic status. And so state line also, we grew up in when we were having a war of the borders. And so Missouri is way different than Kansas as well. And so, yes, it's a different environment altogether.
So what you're saying is you're going to listen and survey people, find out what they're all about, and then make some decisions. Is there
Yes.
Is there a particular mission or thrust of the organization?
So we are centered around education. We do early education and early learner education, so 0 to 5. And this is a new demographic of folks that I've focused on. I've always worked with school agers. And so we're working with 0 through 5, but we're also doing some after school programming when school is back in session for K through 6th grade as well.
Okay, yeah. Sounds like fascinating work that you have done. And we could ask a whole series of questions on each of these things. But let me go on to some other student questions. How have you used your social work degree? And has it only been in professional settings, or have you sometimes also used it outside of professional life?
I think, I'm gonna be honest with you all, I actually think you're born a social worker. I think something that was innate from me sharing the lineage of matriarchy that I come from, that I've always had a sense about community, and that just was taught to me about my grandmothers and my mother, of just, we have to do our part. We are only as good as the least of these. And so I would say it is something that was embedded in me before I knew what social work was. And so coming into Bethel, learning more of theory and practice, I would say did something, only gave terms or language to a way of walking that I've already was experiencing. So yes, I've used it outside just because that's my way of being. I don't think I'll walk into a situation and say, today I'm putting on my social work hat. And so it's just like, if you believe in community, you know, some of the rules are listen instead of like, so even like in organizing, listen to what is going on around you, take a step back, humble yourself to know that you don't have all the answers, be curious in walking in and just seeing what is going on, how can my skill sets, my strengths be utilized in this environment. And so those are the things that I do just walking into a space.
So it sounds like you're actually a social worker sort of 24/7.
Yes.
And whatever situation you walk into, you will be using that listening and figuring things out, being curious about the people there, and then taking some steps to help whatever the situation is.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So you, in your presentation, you mentioned feminism. So here's two questions about that. What does it mean to you to be a feminist? And when did you start to identify as a feminist?
So the curious thing is that the whole thing that I spoke about, the convocation piece, is around identity. And sometimes I think we speak and we talk to ourselves initially. And so I'm coaching my own self. So I would say I have never labeled myself, not that I am or not, but I've never labeled myself saying Tame is the feminist. I've never said that aloud. Um, and but what I believe a feminist is someone who is looking for equity within women in our society. And so like the simple, clean version of that will be just that. And so I believe in equity, whether it's in any area of intersectionality of race, class, economic status, like that, there should be equity within all of those parameters. But I would not, I don't know if I would actually say that I am a feminist. I usually take definitions or words. You would think English is my second language because I usually use words as like saying, look at me and the way I flow in life, and then you will see it. I do not need to speak those words, like you would see it in me.
So actions speak louder than
Definitely.
labels. Yeah. So how do you make that happen? How do you approach your work in community perhaps differently because you believe in women's equity and equity in general than if you did not believe in that? Where can we see that happen?
Definitely. So in my structure right now, I'm an executive director of a nonprofit. So most people would look at that it's a hierarchy type of situation. I talk down to the people in which I supervise, where for me, that's not the full story. Don't get me wrong, there are some questions, for example, like implementing everyone needs to wear masks in the office. Yes, but I'm like, that is what the CDC says. I'm just making sure it's carried out. But when it comes to like decision making, the culture of the environment, I am more so a round table type of person. And so let's all sit down at the table and let's just say, what kind of environment do we all want to have? And how do we hold each other accountable for that as well? So that is my approach, that where I believe in equity, where I make sure that even in my position, I know that it's presumed that I could probably terminate a position at any drop of a hat. So I'm very clear with communication and saying, hey, in these spaces, there is nothing that will be said that will be good. Like I welcome actually someone thinking differently than I, just so that we can be creative in making sure that voices are heard, and not only voices are heard, but those voices that rise are actually put in action and implemented in a system.
Yeah. And so that equity shines through in just how you are handling a variety of situations, particularly maybe around decision making and inclusion of all voices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, here's a different kind of question.
Okay.
The student says, "Thank you for the book recommendation. Can you say more about the Afrofuturism genre?"
Yes, I would say, to preface that I could not in the last year read any of my favorite genre of book, because again, it talks about the end of the status quo, or a society as we know it, and a transformation around intersectionality, around diversity. And might have a few aliens sometimes here and there, or mystics here and there, but it's very honest. And the political side of the writings are very honest with what actually happens in our current society. So I would say Afrofuturism just talks about a way of how do we address some of the issues that we are having in our current life, and what do we dream and hope for? And so sometimes, again, it might use an alien to say it's a diverse issue, or sometimes it might use something that is mystic to say that they're diverse. But what is clear is that not only are we able to talk about it, but we're able to create in those stories an environment or a world that is different than what we have today. The possibilities is something that is anew.
So you said, you started by saying this was not a year when you could read that.
Not at all.
Was
Well,
it too close to
it was
what?
too close to home. And so even the book, Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, it was talking about we've done so much chaos to our environment, where people are like living in walled cities because fresh water, food, all of those things are things that we can't readily have. You have to pay for service for firefighters to put out fires, instead of like that just being a public service. That literally outside of the walls, you're fighting nature. Dogs are looking for the same food that you're looking for. Like, it's just a society that right now, if we step back and think about it, especially like a couple of weeks ago with even having that cold front come across the country, and if we literally had our electricity and water gone, we would be like we call the prehistoric people, by just removing those two items. And so life can change quickly, and many of us had our eyes opened over the last couple of weeks to see that in more ways than one. And so like a few weeks ago, had to deal with the basic needs: food, water, shelter. But we also see it in our behaviors of like, between the Black Lives Matter, between the Me Too movements, like we are all seeing how some of these issues could either make us be able to address them or try to run away from them. And that's the whole point of what I was trying to share, is that we have to choose, how do you want to show up in this world?
Are you going to address things or avoid them and hide from them?
And then there's that plethora in between, or a combination. I know I couldn't read because like I actually said for a few months, you will not see me out protesting, not because I didn't stand for something, but it was too much. And so I had to take care of me. I had to step back for a moment and make sure that I was able to rest and rejuvenate myself enough to be able to have enough energy to share myself with the movements that I actually believe in. And so I found out that my role was those protesters who were in Kansas City. Hey, I'm literally right down the street. If you need milk, I will have milk bottles in my refrigerator. If you need me to babysit your children, I will have the babies and everybody will be okay. But I knew my role could not be out with the masses.
So again, that importance of really being clear about who you are and what your gifts are, and maybe also finding balance
Definitely.
at different parts of your life and taking care of yourself as well as other people.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah. So when do you think you'll be ready to read one of these Afrofuturist books again?
So there is a young adult book, Children of Blood and Bone, that I read a year ago. And so the part 2 came out this last year. And I really want to know what the young girls are doing and how they will overthrow the government.
Right. Yeah.
And ready. And I don't know. I don't know. Like, I see it on my shelf and I'm like, oh, it'll be an easy read. I'll get through it. I want to see how the young ladies in the story, the protagonists, like will venture through. It's just, it has not called to me. And so
you'll just,
hopefully that's just a short period of time, because it's nice. Like today, I would love to sit on my porch to bring out my books and have some tea, but hey, I'm not sure. I'm not ready at this time. And I have to listen to myself and just say, not yet, soon, hopefully.
yeah, so you'll know when the time is right.
Yep.
And it sounds like you're a person who not only listens well to others, but you listen to yourself also.
That has been something you learn in social work. Don't get me wrong, all of my 20s, the majority of my 30s, I did not listen. And that comes to burnout and not caring for you, literally making yourself sick because you're in balance. And so you have to take, I guess the wisdom with age is telling me that you have to listen to yourself, because either your body will tell you by tapping on your shoulder or by screaming. And I would prefer now a tap than a scream.
Yeah, yeah. I have another question or two here.
Okay.
What advice do you have for Bethel College as an institution in terms of issues of intersectionality and about helping students to find and identify who they truly are?
As an institution, I know what helped me was I loved having my host parents, first of all. And so even being removed from Kansas City and coming down to a small town where our highlight was going to like Walmart, but even be a part of a small town, to have those parts of you that you don't even know who you are, like having host parents who have similar backgrounds in you, that can reinforce those areas in your life that you already know that are foundational, but because you're in your early 20s, you don't realize those are your foundational pieces. So that would be the first thing I think helped me out at Bethel, is just having that. And then also being able to explore who that is you want to be. Like, I knew I played sports, and what I liked was that team and that camaraderie. And so therefore, like I received that from being on the sports team. And then later I realized, like, the camaraderie you have only in college. Nowhere else will you ever have the opportunity to sit with people who have diverse points of view than you. But still have a common core of, like, even a location of a college, because as soon as you graduate, you stay with people who majored in the same things or think exactly or closely to you. So it's really hard to like have that. And so what I appreciate is that having those opportunities of, like, one, being able to stay true to those cultural beliefs or traits that you've had by having host families, two, by making sure you expand and open yourself to new ways of thinking by just being in a relationship with people you may not have known, and three, I would say, like, in addition to all of those things, making sure that you leave room for that diversity and those conversations that you may not have, so that will help better shape you into that which you want to be.
Yeah, yeah, very good. I think this will be our last question.
Okay.
So this is looking at your trajectory of career. You've been have a degree in social work, but there are so many opportunities in social work. You've chosen basically community work.
Definitely.
But why that and not counseling or child welfare or school social work or work with homeless or all the other options? How did you come to community work? And what advice, here's the second part of the question, what advice do you have for students about finding the right field or future for themselves?
Mhm. Okay, so for myself, I was actually, for my graduating class, I think I was the only one who wanted to do community. Everyone else was interested in like child welfare and also or counseling. And I know me, so I know myself. I am a nurturing caregiver, hands down. So I knew I needed enough space, literally space between me and the person, because I was a person who, if I heard anything was going wrong with children or elders in the community, I'm like, oh, everybody come home with me. I will take care of you. So like, in that sense, I knew it had to be something where I stepped back a little bit because I know my own nature. And so that is how I chose community. One is because I love people. Like, so I love people dynamics of just seeing how process happens and the diversity of topics and ways of being able to solve, any given thing. And so with that, I listen to myself. What I would say for others is just go listen to yourself. Like all of us knew when we were doing our practicums where we wanted to go and had a sense of like what type of work we were interested in. And by me listening to myself, I will say along the way, I've actually considered like going back to school for my MSW and doing counseling because you get to see the other side too. So when I'm in community meetings, neighborhood meetings, I see where trauma, hurt, and unresolved issues literally have stopped a community process. And so there's a part of me that wants to have those skills to be able, like when someone is triggered, for them not to just be triggered in front of 30 people and left be, but someone to be able to be walk with them, to help them out. And so like that is the other side. And now I would think others too will notice, like whether in child services or in services for families, that you could see the connection between family dynamics and how it is affected on one person. And so like it's all a balance. And so, like I said, I am very much interested in learning, or at least having that skill set to be able to walk with someone if they are being triggered in some way in group settings. But I also recognize my default was more around community or larger systems, just because my natural way of being would want to take care of everyone. And I can't do that, unfortunately, or fortunately.
Yeah. Thank you. You make a good point that social work is really an integration of both working with individuals or small groups and the whole, the community, and those work together. And thank you also for the suggestion that people just really need to follow their heart and listen to themselves. This has been delightful, Jatem, and I look forward to the next time I get to talk with you.
Yes, it's good to see you.
Thank you.